Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Grotto, the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times. And today's morning scoop will cover the state of Latino education, and we'll discuss All in Education's 2021 report, MAPA, the state of Latino education, power and influence, which focuses on the gaps in representation of Latinos in the education space, from classrooms to governing boards, and the impact it has on student outcomes. And we'll also discuss how COVID-19 disrupted learning and key policies and practices that have created inequitable systems. I want to thank our sponsor, All in Education, for engaging with us this morning, because without this engagement, we wouldn't be able to have important conversations like this one today. All in Education exists to build an Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. Joining us is Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kathy Hoffman. Superintendent Hoffman was elected in 2018 and assumed office in 2019. Superintendent Hoffman has spent her entire career working in public education, first as a preschool teacher and then as a speech language pathologist. She began her career in the Vail School District in Southern Arizona before joining the Peoria School District. Her experience as both an educator and advocate for students with disabilities informs her vision for public education. Throughout her career, she's fought tirelessly for equal access to high quality public education, regardless of a student's race, gender, or zip code. As superintendent, she's focused on growing Arizona's educator workforce through targeted recruitment and retention efforts, increasing funding and access to critical social emotional learning resources, expanding digital connectivity for urban and rural school communities alike, and supporting and celebrating Arizona's many multilingual learners and elevating the voices of our state's phenomenal educators. Thank you for joining us, Superintendent Hoffman.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Paul Luna, a nationally recognized leader in philanthropy, education, and community development. Since 2006, he has served as president and CEO of Helios Education Foundation, where he has led the foundation in its efforts to create opportunities for individuals to succeed in post-secondary education. In this role, he's responsible for guiding the strategic direction of the organization, cultivating strong community relationships, and initiating strategic partnerships in Arizona and Florida. He brings more than 25 years of public-private professional experience to the leadership of Helios. He's a native of Miami, Arizona. Mr. Luna graduated from Miami High School and as a first-generation college student attended Stanford University, where he earned a degree in civil engineering. In addition to his role at Helios, Mr. Luna currently serves as a member on the board of directors for a host of educational business nonprofits. Far too many to list. Good morning, Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me. Appreciate being a part of this.
And next we have Jeff Zatino. He's All in Education's Research and Policy Director. As a first-generation college graduate and son to immigrant parents, Jeff experienced the challenges of accessing a quality education and the life-changing opportunities that come with that education. Jeff has made it his life's mission to make those opportunities available to all students, no matter which zip code they live in. His passion for community-driven work led Jeff to obtain his master's in social work from Arizona State University. He's a strong believer in solutions-based work, and Jeff has used his deep understanding of data analytics to develop effective strategies in his current role with All in Education. Throughout his career in community transformation, Jeff has had the opportunity to work with a variety of sectors. His experience in navigating the increasingly intertwined relationships between governments, the private sector, the non-private sector, and grassroots advocacy agencies facilitates his work for meaningful and impactful systemic change in Arizona's education system. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
So happy to be here.
Great. And our last panelist is Stephanie Parra. She's the Executive Director of All in Education. Stephanie is a first-generation American, originally from Yuma. As one of the first in her family to attend college, Stephanie saw firsthand the importance of education and the wonders it can do to develop a child's life and future. Stephanie currently serves as a governing board member of the Phoenix Union High School District, and she represents Ward 3. She's passionate about ensuring every student in Arizona receives an excellent education and is adequately prepared to succeed in college, career, and life. So thank you for being here, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So a little housekeeping here. Before we begin the discussion, I just want to remind our viewers that they can submit questions via the chat, and we welcome your participation. So let me begin with you, Stephanie. We're going to discuss All in Education's report, MAPA, the State of Latino Education, Power and Influence. Can you give us a brief overview of the report and why All in Education uses MAPA as a strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, thank you so much, Gary, and to the Capital Times for having us this morning. Really happy to be here to discuss this important issue. So MAPA is really a tool for our organization. It is an accountability tool for ourselves and for leaders in Arizona. So every year we will look at Latino academic outcomes, and we will look at Latino representation in education. So from the classroom, we keep saying from the classroom to the boardroom, our theory of change at All in Education is that if we're going to close the attainment gap that exists for our community, we have to focus on closing the representation gap and make sure that our community is in the decision-making room when folks are making decisions around policy, practices, or programs that work for students. So that's why we created MAPA. It's a tool to hold ourselves accountable, to report on the progress that we make year after year.
Great. So
do you go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I could add just a little bit on some of the data and some of the findings that we found within MAPA. This year has been the first year that we've seen a little bit of the aftermath of COVID-19, and we all been through its devastating effects. But we see it within the data, right? Within MAPA, we're going to take a close look, or we did take a close look at overall literacy proficiency, math proficiency, and specifically taking a look at third grade reading levels and eighth grade math, because they're so important to the life course of that young learner. And unfortunately, what we saw is that every student within Arizona has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We tracked historical trends for the past 5 years, and we've seen that within 1 year, we got knocked back 5 years of progress into where we were making steady gains within all these different indicators. But one of the things that we also saw within the data is that there's a persistent gap within all of these different indicators between our white student peers, the average for Arizona as a whole, and then clumped lower than that average within test scores is Black, Brown, and low-income students. And even further down in those test scores are English language learners and our special ed population. And this persistent gap has been happening for the past 20 years. And we've seen that the drop affected everybody, but it affected everybody the same way. And what we additionally tried to do is to try to understand why that gap exists within the data and within the educational course of our students. Last year, we took a look at socioeconomic status, or low-income neighborhoods and low-income communities, and the relationship between the performance of schools and school districts within those low-income areas. And this year, we started to analyze what policies have impacted those educational outcomes, like redlining. So at the end of the report, we start to introduce the social determinants of education, a framework that we're borrowing from the medical community called the social determinants of health. The reason that we're adopting this framework is that this framework has helped to expand the conversation within the medical community from just medicines and interventions to cure disease, to making way and making room for social factors to be included within that equation. And likewise, and similarly within the education field, we want to expand the conversation around just curriculum and instruction and make room for these social factors that impact a student's ability to learn and academic performance.
Yeah.
So
And-
go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I was just going to add real quick, one thing that we know to be true as educators and practitioners in the field is that poverty, I've said it, I think my whole career from social worker to educator, poverty is the greatest barrier to educational attainment. And I think educators on the ground know that. And if they are serving in Title I schools, if they are serving low-income communities, we know that it takes additional resources to support this population of students. They require wraparound support and additional interventions on instruction as well, and different kinds of support systems. And so that to us was a critical component. And once we started to unpack what the medical community did and really borrowing from that research, we wanted to create space in the education sector to begin to really dive deeper into these key social factors, as Jeff mentioned, but poverty being kind of that first one that we really started to look at.
Okay, so I'm going to put up a graphic up here, all the key data points in your report, and if you and Jeff can just kind of touch on those real briefly on each one, and then I'll start throwing questions at Paul and Kathy. So
yeah,
1 second here. Oops.
And while you're pulling that up, one thing I'll just plug for folks that are watching, you can download a full copy of the report at allineducation.org/MAPA. And so one of the first data sets that we highlight here, I mentioned early on, is this gap in representation. So while Latino students are 45% of our K-12 population, we're only 14% of state education board members, and 16% of administrators and 16% of the teaching workforce. So again, there is a significant imbalance in representation, and our theory of change as an organization is that we have to start to close that imbalance of representation in order to get better outcomes for students. So that's what this slide represents.
Why do you think there's, only 16% of the workforce is Latino?
Yeah, I think that is a great question for folks that are in teacher preparation. And I know superintendent can probably speak to some of her efforts to really diversify the pipeline. But we have to look at, folks that how students are given opportunity to enter different fields, and how people recruit for teacher preparation programs. And if there is intentional outreach and intentional recruitment strategies to target certain populations of students. And so this kind of tells us that there hasn't been a lot of work to intentionally diversify the pipeline. But I don't know, Superintendent, if you want to speak to, I know you have this as a big top priority, so.
Thank you. This definitely has become one of our top priorities over the past couple of years, and a focus of our educator recruitment and retention team in the department as well. So a lot of it does boil down to access and looking at the college attainment rates for Latino students is also significantly lower than their white peers. And so we have to address the college attainment disparities as well to make and part of that is the cost of attaining of going to college, and making sure that families know that they qualify for scholarships or Pell Grants. So a lot of it has to do with communication to families as well, making sure that they're able to access that information and know what they qualify for. The FAFSA, for example, is extremely complex, and I know the U.S. Department of Education keeps saying that they're trying to make it simpler, but that's still a few years down the road from now, which is really frustrating. But that can be a barrier to families, especially those who don't speak English, to access those funds for their child to go to college. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and even just that bridge between K-12 and university. And then we do require that teachers have their bachelor's degrees and teacher certification unless they're an emergency substitute.
Yeah. And it really does matter. If I can just add real quick, I think what we believe here is that it is imperative, but Arizona not only has a moral imperative to support Latino students, and I know Paul can speak to this, but we also have an economic imperative. As one of the fastest growing demographic blocks in Arizona, we are 45% of K-12, we're 65% of the K-8 population. And if you look at the school district where I serve, Phoenix Union High School District, our demographics have always trended 10 years ahead of the city of Phoenix and 20 years ahead of the state of Arizona. We're 90% students of color, 82% Latino. And unfortunately, to superintendent's point, we're also 77% low income. And so there are barriers to access and opportunity. And so I know, Paul, this has been a longstanding priority of Helios. I don't know if you want to speak to that, the economic imperative that we have as a state.
So I'd be happy to. But first, let me just say thank you to all of you, to you, Stephanie, and the leadership of All in Ed for supporting this type of discussion, to the Arizona Capital Times and Gary for offering the platform for us to continue to have these important conversations. And obviously to the superintendent for your leadership. Thank you so much, and being so strong in your support of eliminating these inequities that we have in education that we've had for many, many years. So to your point, Stephanie, I think it is important for us as a community to recognize that the case that's being made today has been a case that's been made for many decades.
Mm-hmm.
So let's accept that and acknowledge that, because hopefully what that tells us as well is we have to recommit to embracing and understanding the challenges of improving all of our outcomes, educational outcomes for all students. But in particular, when you look at the demographics in Arizona, that particularly means the importance of Latino students, given the numbers and the demographics, which are going to be the destiny of this state and this country. The case was made by the Morrison Institute back in 2002 with the 5 shoes waiting to drop. And they said that one of the most pressing issues in Arizona is education, and education of all of our students to create the workforce that we need. And that's the key. Education and these education outcomes and these data points that we're presenting aren't just because we think it's nice to have a college degree or some type of post-secondary education certificate. It is nice. But the real reason is because it's what ensures that we're preparing our students to be the workforce that we need to drive our economy, to attract the companies to our state, to ensure that we have the innovation and the innovative ideas that this young, bright, talented student population will bring to our state. And the challenge really for us, and again, the case was made 20 years ago now, at least with the Morrison report. The question for us is, do we have the willingness to ensure that we are addressing some of the challenges and barriers that have historically prevented low-income, predominantly minority students from earning post-secondary education and college degrees? And that's what this is really about. Are we committed to addressing these equity gaps that exist across the full continuum?
Okay, and I've got another, let's see here. Now, if Jeff or Stephanie can speak to this, the drop in reading proficiency. And this was, as you can see, COVID had a big impact on our reading and math proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And just for the viewers, I've got this up to 125%, but this first line is all students, or I'm sorry, white students. This next line is all students, and here are the Hispanic and Latino students, and then disadvantaged learners. So, and I believe this is special education, and then we have English learners. Mm-hmm. So can you just talk real quickly about your data point here?
Yeah, Jeff spoke to this earlier. I think what we saw here is that the pandemic impacted all students. Certainly you see the declines there and the impact on all students, but it did it continues to disproportionately impact Latino students, our low-income students, so economically disadvantaged students. And then of course, at the bottom end of the scale here, you have our special education and English learners who are performing even below special education students. And so I think we have to really look at, how are we creating conditions for students to thrive and be successful in the classroom and beyond. And then, what are we going to do collectively as a state? And I think superintendent can probably speak to this. We see a significant impact of unfinished learning that the pandemic has caused. And so how do we rally around students and provide them the supports that they need to be successful? And I don't know, superintendent, if you want to jump in on that one.
Well, yeah, based on what we've seen in these data, we did see the most drastic drops in math. So that has been an area of focus where we've invested significantly, for example, partnering with ASU to provide what they're calling math momentum. And we invested $9 million of our COVID federal relief funding to make sure that our students have access to highly trained, properly certified math teachers in all parts of the state, and make sure they have a quality curriculum that they're learning from. We've also been, one of our other really big investments is that just over $21 million to expand mental health professionals, including school counselors and social workers, to and now we've been able to drastically reduce the student to counselor ratio, which is also really important, because I know Stephanie was just mentioning that how poverty and as well as those wraparound supports are so critically important to student success. So it's one thing to make sure they have a highly trained, properly certified teacher, but then also making sure they have those wraparound supports and people who can help them along the way, in addition to having those classroom teachers, is really critical. So those are just a couple of examples of how the state is supporting our schools and education community, especially in light of the devastating impact of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, I know all of you watch the legislature and what's going on there. I mean, is there anything, they got 1,600 bills. Is any one or any number of them addressing what you guys are talking about this morning?
Well, I would say this week, we're celebrating the fact that they decided not to cut $1 billion from public education. So unfortunately, the focus has been in really going the wrong direction for the future of our schools. What I've been really frustrated about is our neighboring states are all have offers on the all have proposals in their state legislature that are going through right now to give teachers raises to help with their severe teacher shortages that we also experience here in Arizona. Colorado, New Mexico, they're all planning to give significant raises, whereas here in Arizona, that's not even on the table. There's no bill to address the severe teacher shortage. And when I'm talking to our school leaders, our principals, our teachers are all experiencing significant burnout, and it's been a crisis for a while, but it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I've been really disappointed in the focus of the legislature, and they've been more focused on ways to have more punitive policies for educators rather than looking for solutions on how to support our school communities and ensure that we're attracting and retaining the talent that our schools need.
Now that last graphic was, pretty dramatic. I mean, you see that drop, and it's more, it's more for Latino students and impoverished kids, and obviously it's from the pandemic. So what's the department doing to address the unfinished learning?
Well, yeah, I mentioned a few of those examples, a couple other things. So we do have state set aside funds that we're using and we're working to really leverage these federal COVID relief funds at the state level. So for example, of course, investing in All in Education and their parent Educator Academy is one that I know we want to make sure to highlight, because we know that parents and families are a critical component to a child's success at school. So maybe this would be a good time to talk more about that, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we saw early on when we were doing our initial outreach to the community at the height of the pandemic, as schools were closing early on in spring 2020, what we learned was that there was a real breakdown in communication between schools and families, and in particular in the Latino community and in the Spanish speaking community. And so by the time I was on the phone with folks in mid-May, I was the first person talking to them about their child's education since mid-March. And so you can imagine what the other end of the phone sounded like with some of those parents. They were confused and felt lost. And one thing that we did see is the school systems that had a strong family engagement approach and a strong communication strategy fared better. They did much better. And we learned a lot from those school systems that provided that leadership. And so we took those kind of best practices and created this strategy of Parent Educator Academy, which is a new model. And thanks to investments from both the department and Helios Education Foundation, we've been able to scale that program. We started with a cohort of 30 parents in spring of 21, graduated 27 parents. All of them feel more confident and more empowered to be involved in their kids' education. A handful of our graduates are now considering careers in education. They have been inspired. Some of our parents are enrolling themselves in college courses, English classes. They feel motivated to not just support their kids' academic journey, but also now to pursue their own. And so it's been really powerful to see the growth in our parents. We have in the spring, in the fall, of 2021, we were able, thanks to the investments, we're able to scale to serve 103 parents. We graduated 91 in December. And one thing that we're really proud of, as the program continues to scale, we still have maintained a 90% participation and graduation rate, which is unheard of for a lot of parent engagement programs. And so we think, this spring we'll serve another 100 parents and do a third-party evaluation to really get to an evidence-based model by the end of this academic year. But we think it's a promising strategy. And one thing that we're learning from parents and hearing from them is that, this idea that they don't want to get engaged or that they don't have time is it's not accurate, right? They do want to support their kids. They do want to get involved. They just don't know how to do so. And so we wanted to create a strategy and a program to give them the space and the tools and the skills to help navigate the education system. And so that's why we're really excited about the outcomes that we're seeing with PEA. And Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, if I could chime in really quickly, like just being a social worker through training, seeing a 90% attendance rate through all sessions and then a 90% graduation rate is really unheard of. And I think that's something that we're really proud to be able to create a workshop and a series of classes that are both virtual and led in Spanish with amazing facilitators. And we've really seen these parents just blossom from the beginning where they had their videos turned off to the end where they're introducing themselves, telling their story, honoring their history, and really uplifting their children to make that better connection with the school system. And we have other leadership programs as well, because we want to double down on our own community's leadership. We have the Parent Educator Academy that's focused on developing the skills for caregivers. We also have an Adelante program that's geared at mid-level Latino leaders from a variety of different community sectors that want to get more involved into improving educational outcomes within these communities. And that one really speaks to our ethos of the social determinants of education, because we're drawing engineers and cooks and teachers and social workers and healthcare professionals and aspiring administrators and school board officials to all come together and look at communities holistically as we collectively come up with some of these solutions. And our third program is a Listo Academy, which is geared for current or aspiring school board officials and administrators to instill a sense of their own self-racial identity, and also pair that with an increased capacity to do better data-driven governance within the school board level. So we're building relationships horizontally and vertically. Horizontally through different community sectors, and vertically from, you know, parents, mid-level Latino leaders, and even school board officials.
You know, Jeff, when you talk about Adelante, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I think you even mentioned it, was, you know, aspiring school board members. Are there other ways that, you know, folks can, if they come to Adelante, what other ways they can be leaders besides, you know, sitting on a school board? Because that might not be, you know, everybody's cup of tea, right?
Yeah, definitely. So within the Adelante curriculum, we have a lot of learning about what school systems are, the historical performance of different school systems, what makes school systems better, just to give you like an introductory sense of what education systems are, but also teaching, incorporating a project element into this leadership development course. And these project elements allow, we have a member within the cohort that works for the Maricopa County Workforce Development Program. So he's thinking about how do you connect ties between Maricopa County's human services and local school districts to create career opportunities for aspiring high school graduates. We have other people within different other community sectors coming around and talking about attendance rates. So how do you improve attendance rates within a local school? Or we also have other social work professionals within another group within the cohort, thinking about how do we increase the efficacy of social service referrals from the school system to local behavioral health providers, or utility bill programs, or housing programs, and how do you create a better closed loop referrals system from the school out into the community? So we're having this out of the box thinking from these aspiring professionals that may not be ready to make the jump to run a school board race, but definitely have the skills and leadership to improve systems within our communities and make education better.
And one more, well, probably a couple more questions. I got one for myself, but I want to throw this out there from one of the audience members. Can you share your Parent Educator Academy program model? And I'm not sure if they mean
yeah, so you can get more
send an email or-
information. Yeah, folks can get more information on our Parent Educator Academy at allineducation.org/PEA, and reach out to us, and we're happy to share more information. We are we aren't adding additional schools. We do work really closely with the school systems right now and have agreements in place, because for us, it's really important through Parent Educator Academy that we're, you know, this is about relationship building and building bridges between schools and families. And so we work closely with our school community to establish a program. So definitely, if there are interests from school system prospective partners out there, please reach out to our team, and we're happy to have a conversation about PEA for sure.
Now, in MAPA, you talk about you know, the list of barriers to engagement. What are some of those barriers to engagement?
Yeah, historically, you know, it has been one thing that we have said is that we have to change hearts and minds about how our community is viewed, right? How our community is viewed by school and system leaders, and by leaders in the state of Arizona. And I think for a long time, we have been viewed from a deficit perspective. So we are, you know, being a Spanish speaking family or a bilingual family has been viewed as a deficit. And so when you look at the academic achievement and outcomes of English learners, we have not created the conditions for them to be successful in Arizona public schools. And so what are we going to do to ensure that this population of students can thrive? And so really, we are here as a way to start shifting and really coming at changing the perspective of leaders in the state, that we are, you know, we are a value add. We are an asset that's worthy of investment. And I know, as I mentioned, like Paul, you guys have done so much work and so much advocacy around changing those hearts and minds over the years. So if you can speak to the efforts of Helios and what you've done to to support our community over the course of many, many years now.
Well, we're all in this together, I think is the point. And there's definitely a data case to be made that talks about the importance of addressing all of these educational inequities, and especially with Latino student success, recognizing that, again, the changing demographics, I think, make it imperative to the state of Arizona that if we want to have a thriving economy, the case is made with data and facts that we have to improve our education outcome for our Latino students. We have to do that. But the point I think that Stephanie's making is we all have to embrace that. We all have to own that. We all have to do our part. Student success is not defined solely what happens in the classroom or in the schoolhouse or the teacher, or solely the responsibility of the teacher or the education administrator. They are clearly critically important and we need to support them better. But the idea that the wraparound services, whether it's engaged parents or more broadly engaged communities, we have to recognize and acknowledge that housing stability, food security, access to healthcare, safety and security, available technology, Wi-Fi access, all of these are important areas that affect student outcomes. And all of those issues are outside of the classroom. And that's where the community has to embrace this. And I'll say one final thing. In my opinion, again, the case is made with data. To Stephanie's point about changing hearts and minds, it really is very simple in my mind. It's when you listen to education leaders, policy leaders, business leaders, listen very carefully. When they talk about our student population overall, the question is, do they embrace all students as our students? Or do they say these students and those students? And too often the mindset has been, well, these students are doing just fine, and we tend to care more about these kids than those kids. And that's the reality of what's been holding us back in improving our education outcomes. That's what's been holding us back in addressing these inequities in education. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to listen very carefully. And the key is, are we willing as a state to embrace every student, regardless of their background, but the importance of what they bring to our state, and embrace every student as our students?
Absolutely.
Paul, what does the community do at the community level in advancing, strategies that address the social determinants of education?
Well, I'll start and then ask others to chime in, but I think I'll pivot from that in saying, what do others do, and how important it is it really is the voice of the community that demands the policy changes. Right? It's when the voice of the community, when business leaders, community leaders, education advocates all have one voice and demand greater investment in our education system. That's what it will take in order for, I think, the policymakers to start to make different decisions than we've made in the past. Education in Arizona has historically and continued, in my opinion, to be viewed as an expense and not an investment. And one of the fundamental principles and beliefs of Helios Education Foundation is that education is actually the greatest investment we can make in the future of our state. Absolutely. But when we view it as an expense, all you're trying to do is cut expenses. That's a business model. You cut expenses. Well, education is not an expense. It is an investment. The other thing I would say, because I think it's really important to acknowledge this from earlier in the conversation, a focus on academic preparedness of our students is imperative for their success as well. And there are you asked a question about, what bills might be at the legislature to help improve these student outcomes. Well, one, and I know it's a high priority for Helios and many others, is access to dual enrollment. Mm-hmm. So access to dual enrollment at a high school is powerful for every student. And the key is, how do we make dual enrollment courses accessible to more students, but especially traditionally underserved, low-income Latino students and other minority students? And here's why that's powerful. Think about this. If every senior in high school can take dual enrollment courses and complete their first year of college for free before they graduate from high school, they've done two things. They've proven to themselves and everybody else that they are college ready. because they're passing these dual enrollment courses. So there's no debate. Are you a college going student? Absolutely. I'm already passing college coursework. And then if you can get those credits, you've minimized the financial implications of what a college degree is going to cost. And how do you manage the finances? Because you've knocked out at least 1 year before you even get there. That's powerful. So there's a bill at the legislature that's trying to figure out how do we improve access to dual enrollment and make it more available to more students. And I think that's the type of policy solutions and where our voices can drive meaningful change.
Yeah.
All right. And real quickly, someone wanted to know more about the Helios 5-year impact plan and the Latino student success strategy.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share that. I'll be real quick because I've been talking a lot. From a Helios perspective, we feel that with a sense of urgency, the time is now. We think about the next 5 years as most critical years for education outcomes for all of our students in Arizona, but in particular, the Latino student population that we're talking about today. Whether or not we can start to make and create the systemic change necessary to have more Latino students be successful in post-secondary education, what we do in the next 5 years will define the trajectory of these students and our state for the next 25 years. So the 5-year impact plan is focusing on those key metrics. How do we improve third grade reading for all of our students at third grade? How do we increase the college going rate of all of our public high schools in Arizona? And how do we improve our degree completion rates, that overall attainment goal? Those are the 3 key metrics that we at Helios are focused on over the next 5 years and believe in partnership with great partners like All in Ed, with the leadership of the superintendent and so many other partners like Education Forward and Aliento and so many others. We are now, I think, at a point where we have the opportunity to begin to create this change that we need. So it is with hope. It is with a great sense of positive energy that we think the next 5 years is where we can actually make a difference so that 20 years from now, we're not still talking about the 5 shoes waiting to drop that came out in 2002, and we're still in the same place that we were then and are now. The change has to start now so we make that trajectory change.
Yeah.
I got a question for Superintendent Hoffman. You know, in MAPA, there's some discussion in there about, you know, like the misperception of Latino students, that they're a problem and are a problem to be solved, I think, is the words you use. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, but I think it was something to that effect. So one of our audience members asks or says, I believe a critical thing to address is teachers' perception that Hispanic Latino children will struggle, such as in math, science, and English. But as long as teachers believe that, children will believe it about themselves. I mean, what can we do to change that perception?
I think part of what that points to is why it's so critical to have Latinos in leadership roles and to have teachers who are also part of the Latino community as well, so that students have those models that they see, that they even see themselves as a future teacher by having people who are Latino in leadership roles within our school communities. So that can help to break down those misconceptions. It's also about the language that we all use. So for example, you know, I actually grew up speaking Japanese, so I grew up bilingual and then later on learned Spanish in college. Like Stephanie said, that is an asset to me, that I had wonderful opportunities to me because I could speak different languages. And so also making sure that the language we're all using is that our students who are learning English, that they are bilingual, they are multilingual, that is an asset for them. When I go to Bank of America and they have a little thing that says hablo español, or and I ask them like, oh, I've asked them, do you get a bonus for being bilingual? And they say, yeah, I actually make more money because I am a bilingual teller here at the bank. So we do need to think about the language that we're using when, like Stephanie was saying, so that it's more viewed as an asset and not a deficit. And again, making sure we have those models of Latino leaders within the school community so that the students feel more empowered.
All right. And, you know, is the department doing anything internally to prioritize schools and students that need the most resources?
Absolutely. And so in making decisions about how we're allocating the federal COVID relief funds, we have been absolutely looking into data. We've been making sure that funding is getting to our most underserved communities, also communities most impacted by COVID. Some of the data that we use to make these decisions is also communities that have less access to internet and technology. So those are some of the factors that we're looking at when we're making decisions on how we're allocating the funds. So for example, one of our initiatives was $1.5 million in a project called the Final Mile Project, which is to bring internet access out to students in rural communities that didn't have internet at home, which is so critical for student learning. We've also been making teacher trainings more widely available statewide to make sure that educators are highly trained in academic areas like math and literacy. So we have a lot of different projects going on, but we do use data to drive those decisions to make sure that the communities that need it the most are able to access those resources.
Okay, and Paul, if we can go back to the trajectory for just a moment, if you remember that first slide, I think it was, or one of the first slides, I think 75% of Latino students graduate high school, and then there's, I'll put it up here in a second, but do you see an opportunity in what we can do to engage or provide opportunities for these Latino students when, you know, so many don't make it to four-year college, and then there's an even bigger drop in those that graduate from college?
Paul, you're on mute.
Nope.
I'm trying to be respectful and I got on mute. I think the point of that is that goes back to where the data and statistics today make the case, but they don't define the future. And that's why the importance of the next 5 years in particular is critical to what we do to start to change those trajectories. I made reference to the importance of increasing academic preparedness, but it goes beyond that, as many have been talking about. How do we better support students as they navigate an education system? When you look at the demographics of students, sorry, my lights just went off. When you look at the demographics of students, you recognize again that the vast majority of future students that are going to go to college by definition are likely to be Latino. So many of them are going to be those first generation college students that require different supports. They require an understanding of culture, background, the uniqueness of that community. The academic preparedness is the same, but the cultural support, the embracing of the student is where I think we really have to understand, and the systems themselves, the colleges and the universities need to better understand how to support the changing demographics of the population of the students that are coming their way. You know, one of the unique opportunities is that every one of Arizona's public universities and I think 19 of our community colleges across the state are all designated as Hispanic serving institutions. That means that 25% or more of these students are already Hispanic. The question becomes for us now is, do we actually just enroll these students at this high percentage and this growing percentage, or do we actually serve them to degree completion? I'm very excited to share that there's a partnership that's emerging called the HSI Consortium. It's led by Marla Franco, who is a leader from University of Arizona, with Ray Rivera, the president of Estrella Community College up here in Phoenix. And they're working together to collaborate with all of the HSI designated colleges and universities in our state to share best practices to improve the outcomes of students. And I think that's just the beginning. This is where Arizona can, based on our unique demographics and our commitment to serving all students to a positive education outcome, might possibly be an opportunity for us to actually lead the nation in when it comes to Latino student success overall. And the HSI Consortium, the commitment of organizations that just are committed to define all odds for the purpose of improving student outcomes. And I think that's the spirit that we need to improve. Stephanie?
Yeah, and Paul, actually, you know, you were the one that kind of made the aha moment for me as well. And in this specific conversation around, we also are in a moment in time where we have Latinos in leadership in higher education across the state, right? We have our first Latino president at NAU, the first Latina provost at ASU, the interim chancellor of the Maricopa colleges. And so you have leaders who do represent our community, who understand our community. And if our theory of change is valid, right? Like, these are the leaders that are going to your point, really create an impact in the next 5 years.
And only because I can't help myself, do you acknowledge Nancy Gonzalez, who's now the provost at Arizona State University? She's from Miami, Arizona. So not only is she Latina, but she just by herself and her accomplishment, she's a role model for what every young Latina in Arizona, regardless of where you come from, you can achieve significant success as Nancy has. So she understands what it is to be a rural educated Latina in Arizona. And there's power in that. And that's why I think we've got a unique opportunity now.
So Paul and Steph, like I feel like I'm a listener in this conversation because I just got goosebumps. But you're completely right. Like the time is now. The data shows a huge drop in academic performance, and we all have to rally around this moment and uplift our community leadership and make this happen. There's a concept within the home visitor workforce, the 2-generational approach to providing social services. So you address the child, but you also address the family and environment. And I think that we could draw from that approach and taking a multi-generational approach to academic achievement for the Latino student, since so many Latino students are not graduating and not making it into college. We have to increase economic opportunity for those kids that didn't enroll in a 4-year program. So vocational schooling, vocational training, and adult learning is going to be super important, because we have to address the social fabric, the poverty within our communities, and also the younger students that we're gonna push into college.
And if I might add, I think there's an important point to be made as well when we talk in sort of general terms about Latino students. Is not every Latino student is the same either. And we have to recognize that there are uniqueness and unique challenges. We at Helios very strongly embrace the idea of equity in terms of every student. And we begin with, regardless of where you're born, regardless of your background, regardless of your zip code. There's a large student population in Arizona that are Dreamer students or DACA recipients. And one of the challenges for these students, which are a significant portion of our student pipeline, is that when they want to go to college, they have to pay out-of-state tuition. Yet they were basically educated through the Arizona K-12 system. There's a ballot initiative, I know many of you are aware of it, but really it's the test that says, are we really willing to commit and serve and allow for equitable access for all students? And I think, again, the case is made on the importance of why we need to remove every barrier for every student, regardless of their background, because at the end of the day, the future of Arizona will be defined by our ability to support all of our students to be successful in post-secondary education. That's what the business model tells us. That's what the research tells us. If we don't have an educated workforce ready to do the jobs of the future, then we're going to be going in the wrong direction when it comes to the economics of our state. And so it is in our we have a vested interest to educate all students in every way possible.
Somebody made a comment about the Prop 203, the English only bill. Has this law been detrimental to dual language instruction and our multilingual learners for, since it's been around? And
Superintendent, I know you're really passionate about this issue. I'll let you chime in. Yeah.
I was about to jump in because I am so passionate about it. I strongly advocate that we need to fully repeal this law. It is, even just in the way it's written, it's very offensive to anyone who is learning English as a second language. We have made some progress through legislation so that it used to require 4 hours of English only instruction where students were not even immersed, or they weren't even in the same classroom as their their peers who were the native English speaking peers. So that was also very detrimental to their learning and their growth. But we still have to get that completely off the books by a full repeal, which would need to go to the voters for approval. But we should not be waiting any longer to fully repeal that.
And if you look at the academic outcomes that we've seen, English learners are performing, at the very bottom of the scale. And so the model that we have right now is not working for them successfully. So when we think about creating opportunity and access to opportunity, that's one of the things that we agree with the superintendent. We absolutely have to change our approach to English learners in Arizona, for sure.
Do you know if the English learners achievement goes up once they become proficient? I mean, is there any data about that?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think we'd have to do some digging on that. We haven't unpacked it too much. I don't know, Superintendent or Jeff, if you have anything to add to that, but I think we'd need to do some research on it.
Okay. And I have a question here from Joe Delgado. He says, how are we connecting parents and students with the community colleges? As a member of the Latino Chancellor's Community Outreach Committee for 20 years, I see the need for a greater connection.
Well, one example I can point to is that the Maricopa Community Colleges actually partners with local high schools, and they basically have a community college school counselor that they embed in the high school community, so that there's someone already part of the high school that can speak to that pathway for high school students to access community college. And I know we've talked a lot about the post-secondary attainment, which is of course critically important, but I want to make sure before we get to the end that we also don't forget to mention access to childcare and preschool is also so fundamental to all of these conversations, because if we don't start young with our youngest learners, we know that that's having a direct impact on their ability to be successful when they get to elementary school. And then when I look at the third grade scores, the literacy scores, the math scores, my first question is, well, which of those kids had access to high quality preschool education, or what did their family childcare opportunities look like? Because we have such long wait lists for those programs in Arizona. And now that I have a little 3-month-old at home, I can even attest to the fact that childcare is very hard to come by for our youngest learners. So I have even greater urgency, even though this has always been a priority, around making sure that that our families have access to high quality preschool programs for all.
All right, well, we're coming up on our time, and Stephanie, would you like to one last word, and then I'll sign us off.
Yeah, and if anybody has any final thoughts, please feel free to share. But I just want to say I'm grateful for this conversation. I think I want us to walk away feeling hopeful, right? That yes, the challenges are great, but look at this coalition that we have put together in Arizona, and this is just some of our partners. And I think that it is true that it's going to take all of us to come together, to rally around our community, to create solutions. And so I'm grateful for our partners, and we'll continue to build from here. But I don't know if anybody else has any final thoughts. Yeah.
No, well, can you give the internet address, the URL?
Yeah. You please, you can get a copy of our report, MAPA, at allineducation.org/MAPA. There it is. Thank you so much.
Yeah, didn't want to forget that. I know you mentioned it earlier, but wanted to make sure people had that information. So we've run out of time. It's time to conclude our program, and I want to thank our panelists and thank our sponsor, All In Education, and also thank all of the viewers who joined us this morning. And I'd like to remind everyone that we have more morning scoops in March, so keep an eye out, and we'll announce all the details. So have a great day, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.